Thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it. As everyone knows, this is the Legal Practice series. So it's a series that I introduce so that people who want to enter the profession can hear from lawyers in the profession about what the profession is like in practice, and then also the different areas of law that they're practicing in. So today we have the lovely Cecilia, who will be talking to us about all things criminal law, solicitor advocate life, all of that. So Cecilia, if you don't mind, can you start off by giving everyone just a brief overview of your legal journey to date, and then we'll go into each thing in more detail.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me on to your podcast, Nadine. I'm so happy to be here. So basically, to start off with, I'm a criminal lawyer, and I have been a criminal lawyer, a defence criminal lawyer, for about 15 years now. So a long time. However, obviously the journey to becoming a lawyer takes quite a bit of time, as I'm sure most of you are probably realizing at the moment.
Absolutely.
So, when did I start? So I had it was a little bit unusual in those days when I started my process. But so I'll give you a bit of background. So I unfortunately lost both my parents quite early. So my mum died during childbirth to my younger brother when I was 3. And then my dad died when I was 12, about 3 months before my 13th birthday. So it was pretty...
I wasn't expecting it, sorry.
Awful. No, it's fine. It was pretty awful. But at that stage, I then had to just kind of either sink or swim. And that's basically where it all started. I only had a plan A. I didn't have a plan B, because plan A was I had to succeed. Because I had my younger brother to look after as well. And I just knew that I had it in me and I would be able to do it. But there were lots and lots and lots of times when I just thought I couldn't do it, and I never would. But you persevere and you hang on in there. So I started from a pretty difficult backdrop. Obviously, I still did all my education. And then whilst I was doing my law degree, I worked, I think I had 3 jobs at the time. So
wow.
For my law degree, I worked, so most of it, I tried to make sure that it was legal based. So it had something to do with law, because that was important, to try and build up connections, but also get an insight into different areas of law. So I worked as a receptionist for one firm, because in those days, and I say those days and I feel really old now, so obviously in most firms, phones after 6 o'clock get diverted. They go to a voicemail or something.
The good old days then.
Yes. But when I started out, we didn't have diversion like that, So, and it's not that old, not that long ago. But basically what would happen is I would be the person on the other end of the phone between probably 6 to 9 p.m. answering the phone. And then obviously taking messages and so forth. But what that did for me is it gave me a good insight into what happened in law firms, And when you are in the front line, as I was, as a receptionist, you get to speak to all sorts of people. You get lots of different types of people. You get the
interesting. I wasn't going to say bad, but bad.
Exactly. So it was great, because it gave me a real insight as to customer service, client care, but also dealing with queries on your feet. So I would do that about 3 days a week after uni. Another job I had was outdoor clerking. So I would go along and take notes and sit behind a barrister and write down everything that was happening. So I was the eyes and ears for the solicitor. And I would be sitting there thinking, I can do better than that. But at the same time, there were times when I was like, wow, that's incredible. And that was brilliant, because again, it gave me insight. It taught me how to behave in court, but it also taught me how to dress elegantly, because there were these beautiful specimens who were these female barristers who were just wafting around. You could smell the perfume, but also they just looked so serene, and it was such a good way to see
the profession,
side. So one job was in the law firm, the other job was in court with a client, listening to judges, seeing how judges spoke, the language that was used in court, how they behaved towards counsel, and how they behaved towards your client, but also understanding what your client was going through when you walk through the door with them, and most times, and then they have to go and sit in the dock, and you could tell they're sweating, they're tapping themselves.
Stress.
But it gives you a good insight. And then my last job, which I was doing at the same time, was working for Ladbrokes on Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, lovely. What a difference.
It was. You know, you learned different things in Ladbrokes at that time, you know. One of the things was obviously how much I hated smelling like smoke, because in those days you're allowed to smoke indoors. So it was really interesting, but I enjoyed working, but it was tough. So I did that for a while, and then by the time I graduated, I had already, you know, obtained my connections. So one of the firms where I used to work as a receptionist, they were a civil firm and did some criminal. They created a post for me in their civil department. But at the same time, I'd been working as an outdoor clerk in a criminal firm, and they offered for me to join them as a fee earner, as a paralegal, and they were going to put me through what's called the accreditation, the police station accreditation.
Nice.
To me, criminal law seemed a lot more interesting, so I decided to go down that route. So I did that and worked with them for about a year, and then did my police station accreditation. And following that, it was time to kind of think about what I wanted to do. And one of the things I was thinking about doing was taking a year out and going to the bar. So I wanted to be a barrister. But at the time, it was quite difficult because obviously I still had my younger brother and didn't have much money. And at the time, the bar, you know, the scholarship they were offering was a lot less than what you could, you know, end up making as a lawyer, as a solicitor. So I decided actually what I needed was money. So it was a bit of a bittersweet for me, because I felt like that career path at that time for me was cut off from me because of money. So I ended up going to become a solicitor, and actually I thought, I bloody love this, and I'm glad I
That's
did.
good. It's always nice when you think you know what you want, and then you go down a different route and you're like, actually, I'm so glad I did it this way.
Yeah. And in actual fact, the solicitors I worked for at the time, the partners had said to me, look, if you come and work for us, we'll give you a training contract, which was really amazing, because I'd been working with them for about a year and a bit, and they, you know, wanted to keep me, which was, don't know why, but they were. And they did. They registered themselves to become a training firm, just so that they could take me on to be able to be a trainee. So I was their first ever trainee, and it was good fun, but it was hard. So whilst I was working as a fee earner, so I had a caseload by day. In the evenings, I was then going to university to do the LPC. So I did my LPC part-time whilst working as a solicitor. And so what that meant is all of the work that I'd been doing as a solicitor also counted towards my training. So I didn't have to do 2 years after finishing my LPC, because I already had some experience. So that worked well.
Wow.
So it was a very unusual path.
You say unusual, but I feel like it's so interesting because you explored so many different areas. You explored a number of different professions. So there's so much for us to cover. I think my first question to you, and obviously something that you touched on, was obviously the fact that you thought you wanted to be a barrister, and that's what you were spending a lot of your time and your interest in terms of shadowing them in court, and then you went down the solicitor route. Is that why you then went on to become a solicitor advocate? And if that is the reason, what is a solicitor advocate, just for those who are not entirely sure?
Okay, so I always had a love for advocacy, and in criminal law, solicitors do conduct advocacy in the magistrates' court. So that's what I did every day anyway. But I always had that love and that passion for speaking for people. So therefore, I decided to try and pursue a career in advocacy, but in the Crown Courts. So in order to be able to have what's called rights of audience, so to appear and be able to speak on behalf of somebody, you do have to have higher rights. So that is when I had to go back to uni, and it was a course that I did part-time whilst working, so it's fine, you can do that. I think I did mine with BPP, so a lot of people will be familiar with that, but I think College of Law also do it. Most universities now do have the high rights course as well. So I did that, and then it enabled me to be able to appear in the Crown Court. So I then ended up in a position where I had the best of both worlds, because what I found as a solicitor is I would go to the police station with somebody and you create a bond, especially at the police station, because I know you probably have never been to a police station.
I have on work experience.
On the other side.
Not on the other side.
So when you're on the other side, it's a bit different to when we go to the police station. Of course. So you find that you're, for the first time, you know, so for example, if you decided, obviously bar having this podcast at the moment, we're live, but if you decided you wanted to go to the toilet, for example, you can just go to the toilet. If you decided, actually, I'd like a cup of tea now, you can just get up and go and make yourself a cup of tea.
Of course.
In the police station, your rights curtailed. Absolutely. So things like having tea, having water, picking up a phone to someone, you have to ask for permission. And I then realised, going to police stations, just how important our role, or my role as a solicitor was, because you're that person that makes sure that the ordeal that the person is going through in custody is to a certain extent bearable. And you are their shining light, you are their hope, you are the only person that's standing there between the police and their freedom, who can actually help you or help them to leave that place. So whilst you're there, the biggest thing about that role is trust. So you build rapport with your client and you gain their trust. And once you have that trust, if you have that trust, it lasts for a lifetime. So what then happens is the next stage will be, if they are charged, they will go to the magistrates' court. So I could, again, pop up at the magistrates' court and represent them. And what I was finding is whenever they then went to the Crown Court, I would then have to
hand them over, right? Yeah,
exactly, which was a bit difficult. So I decided, actually, I wanted to hold their hand throughout. Now, it's a little bit difficult in terms of the rules. So, for example, if I wanted to end up representing them in the Crown Court, for example, really I ought to only start probably at the magistrates' court, because you shouldn't really represent them in the police station as well as the
magistrate and Crown Court. Okay,
they're giving evidence. It can get a bit tricky because you are there, you advise them, you kind of can become a witness. So, but what I always wanted to do was to remain holding my client's hand throughout the proceedings, or for as long as I could.
Yeah.
And that's why I decided, actually, why don't I just try and qualify to become a solicitor advocate? And I did. And never looked back. So I've got the best of both worlds.
It definitely sounds like it. And I think, like you, I really wanted to do criminal law. I was so passionate about it. I fell in love with this solicitor that I knew, and I did so much work experience with her, and I was like, yeah, criminal law is it. But one thing about criminal law is that I feel like it can be emotionally very heavy at times, especially, like I said, when you build your relationship with your clients, you really start to feel the pain that they're feeling when they're going through these things. They don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know what their life's going to look like a month from now, let alone 5 years from now. How is it that you have dealt with the emotional side of being a criminal solicitor advocate?
So I think you never truly deal with it completely, because every case is different, every client is different, and the facts of and the circumstances are always different. I think it's important to make sure that you do have that side of you that you are compassionate and you are sympathetic and empathetic. I don't think you ever lose it, and I don't think it's possible to ever find a criminal lawyer who says that they're never affected by the things that they see and have to deal with. But what you have to do is you have to grow a thick skin and just try to focus on the job at hand. And within that, you find that the more that you're able to focus on the evidence and focus on what you need to do, the easier it becomes. But you still do get affected by things. And the wonderful thing about law is there are so many different areas in the legal profession that there is an area, I always find, for every character.
Absolutely.
Personality.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I couldn't really do property law. Sorry for.
Oh, I love property.
But,
I spent 4 years in property. I love property, but it's fine.
That was one of the subjects for me that I did because I had to get through.
Yeah, and that's the case for a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people don't like studying property, but I promise it's different in practice. I promise.
I'll take your word for it. So, I find that and this is why it's so important to undertake work experience, because if, for example, you end up in a situation where you just jump head first into an area because you think, actually, I think I'd like to do criminal law because I've watched lots of things on TV and I love the way that people handle themselves and report, kind of in real life, it's not really like that. So
there's a lot of waiting around. There's a lot of
and a lot of emotional turmoil, just like what we were talking about. And there are always some sorts of cases that someone won't feel comfortable doing. And cases for me, I find paedophilia very difficult, and those are the sorts of things that I struggle with. But at the same time, as a lawyer, you have to be able to detach and you have to be able to focus on exactly what it is you're doing. And, if there are cases that you find really difficult, so there might be people out there who, for example, are parents or new parents to young children, and then they find themselves having to deal with somebody who's accused of doing things
to a child. Yeah.
Now, as a defense lawyer, you're not there to judge. You are there to put the case forward on behalf of your client. And if you find that you're unable to do that, then you shouldn't be doing it, because you're not giving that person a fair chance at having a fair crack at the whip. And, you might enjoy criminal, but you might enjoy being a prosecutor. That's also a way that you could do it. And that's also, a great route to follow. And that's why it's important to be true to yourself and just do and go with what feels right within your gut. There's nothing worse than being in a situation where you hate the work that you're doing, you hate the field you're in, because sometimes it's very difficult to then cross over.
I think that's a perfect segue, because you obviously decided to go into criminal defence work. And like you said, there is the opportunity to become a prosecutor and work for the CPS. Why did you decide to go down the defence route as opposed to the prosecutor route? What was the determining factor for you?
So there's a lot of things that I think happen to people in their lives, and it then, in a way, kind of puts them on a course or on a path. So for me, it was an episode that happened at school. And so, as you can tell, or some might say, I like to talk. So it's quite handy that I get paid to talk. But so basically, I was in school and I came across a situation where there was a boy who was arguing with a girl. So the context was, the boy was white, I think he was a traveller, and the Irish traveller, and the girl was African and had a pronounced African accent. So there was some kind of argument happening, and it was mainly to do with taking the mick out of her accent. And I kind of knew her. I didn't know the boy, but it was in school, and I was like, oh, you can't, stop picking on her, basically.
Yeah.
So I then decided, I'm not having none of this because, being 5'1".
Cecilia to the rescue.
Exactly. So I steamed in and sort of came to her defence, and then was giving it the big un and the lip. So I was like, no. Now, we started having this sort of argument, me and this boy, and then it turned physical. Now, I don't remember quite how it turned physical, but it turned physical. And I would say I don't really remember much of anything else except for waking up in hospital, because he knocked me out. Sorry for my language.
You bit off more than you could chew.
I did indeed. So anyway, I ended up in hospital, knocked out, and my guardian at the time, my uncle who was looking after me, came to the hospital. Police were called by the school. They came to the hospital. And I remember the police asking what had happened, and I told them the story. So we're in a situation where a girl, regardless of what's happened, has been knocked out. So that's, you've been unconscious. So really that's GBH. They're in hospital. So an assault has taken place. So I ended up telling the police my story and so forth. And to my surprise, but at the time I was quite young, so I didn't really necessarily understand everything that was happening. I think I was about 15, to be honest. The police then started explaining to myself and my uncle that we shouldn't proceed with the case, and proceeded to talk us out of it, and saying things like it will just be a real nightmare for you, and I don't want to see you go through the court process. But let's just pause. It's not me who's going to be going through the court process per se.
Yeah.
It's the suspect, it's the defendant, it's the person that has knocked me out. So really, it was an assault, or at least it should have been investigated.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. So I then decided I didn't want to proceed with it, because I just thought, oh God, the police, they must be right. They're the police. They're there to look after us and make sure, and protect us in a way. And they're people in authority. So, I trust what they say. So therefore, we didn't proceed with it. But growing up and later on, I then realised that was wrong.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
was a victim, and that should have been pursued. So that was one of the reasons why I decided, actually, I want to be involved in the criminal justice system, whether it's prosecution, whether it's defence. I want to be involved. And you would think that I'd want to be involved mainly on prosecution, because I'd be thinking, well, I'll take this case further.
Yeah.
But for me, it was I felt at the time growing up that there was a bigger issue there. And I felt that had I not been in the skin that I'm in now, maybe things would have been different. And had the suspect perhaps been in different skin, like perhaps if we looked the same, maybe it would have gone no further. Or, I was left very uncomfortable about the whole situation and how things had transpired, because I felt that I had been let down. And I thought, well, how many other instances are there where people like me are being let down in the system? And then I came to the understanding and the realization from my own personal experiences and working in law firms and so forth, that actually a lot of the time there were things that were happening to people that looked like me, which were unjust. Yeah. And that's why I decided that I wanted to actually be a defence lawyer and do what I could.
That's such a perfect explanation, and something I definitely identify with, because it's funny that you say, given the story, it makes sense that you would think prosecution, but actually it was defence. And that was exactly the same thing for me. When I was really fixated on criminal law, it was after the passing of a friend. He died through a knife crime incident, and the person who we all knew had killed him, but the police obviously didn't know or couldn't prove it, or whatever that situation was, didn't face any charges, didn't go to prison, nothing. And I became so passionate about it. But instead of going down the prosecution route, I was really passionate about defending, because like you say, I felt like there was an injustice here. And it was an injustice because, unfortunately, the reality is that people that look like us, the cases are not a priority, or the work is not put in the way it needs to be put in. And so I completely understand what you're saying. And I think that was a major thing for me. But then during my process, anytime I'd speak to a criminal lawyer, one thing that they would mention is criminal law doesn't pay. Yeah, you can have all your passion, but criminal law doesn't pay. Have you ever had that where people try to persuade you out of criminal law? And how have you kind of ignored that and keep pushing despite that?
Well, first of all, I just want to say sorry to hear about your friend.
Okay.
And, you know, I'm sorry that, you know, the system let you down, let your family and friends down. You know, oh, it's not
Yeah, it is.
So, yeah, in relation to criminal doesn't pay, I think this is something that has been said for as long as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
But I would really be doing an injustice to your listeners and your followers and my listeners and followers if I sat here and said, no, it's fine, everything's great, because it's not.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, the criminal justice system is at breaking point. And there's a lot happening basically in the criminal justice system. There was an announcement today.
Yes.
Yeah,
I saw in the Law Society Gazette. Yeah.
Yes, in relation to an injection of funds into the criminal justice system, which is great and is really needed. And that's the criminal justice system throughout.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I have found difficult is that you can't put a price on somebody's life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unlike all other areas of law, you don't have the same consequences as a criminal lawyer. Granted, it's not like America, where literally you're fighting for someone's life if they are convicted.
Yeah,
and it's a
like
crime
death penalty, yeah.
You know, they can get the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
But here, it's still the same thing, because if you're going to take somebody's liberty away for years, I mean, being in prison for 1 day is long enough. Being in prison and being in a police station for 1 day is long enough. So when you start talking about, you know, young men who are going to prison for murder or manslaughter or drugs, and they're getting hefty sentences, which mean that when they come out, most of their adolescent and young adult life is
gone.
With.
Yeah,
that is a lot to have and to have to deal with. And so if you are passionate about that, I think that's what brings you through, and that's what pushes you. And that is how the government have managed for so long to get away with
actually paying properly and putting the money in. Yeah,
a lot of criminal lawyers and people going to criminal law have got that sense of responsibility that they want to help, they want to fight injustice, they want to be the person that's standing in between their client and the state who are trying to put them in prison.
Yeah.
But obviously, in the last couple of years, it's got worse and it's got worse. And I think one of the things that I don't know if you're aware of, but there was due to be action being taken by barristers where they were going to undertake a process upon which they would no longer accept their court returns. So it's like a strike, but it's not a strike. So basically what would happen is, if you instruct a barrister and, for example, that barrister accepts your case and says, fine, I'll see you at trial in 2023, for example, because that's something that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, long wait time before we actually get to a hearing. Yeah.
And it's also because of COVID and because there's such a backlog in the criminal justice system. So if you've got your barrister and they're due to undertake your trial in 2023, now it doesn't mean that they then don't accept other work between now and then, because they have to, you know, that's what they do. But if, let's say, they are in the middle of doing a case and that case overruns and your case is due to start, you're then left in a situation where you don't have a barrister because your barrister's in another trial. Yeah. And your barrister usually is unable to say, actually, I'm now going to leave this trial and go
jump on another trial,
because they just can't do that. So what would ordinarily happen out of the goodwill of, the bar, is somebody else would step in. So Barrister B would come in. So I would contact them and say, oh my God, help me. This has happened. I've got this case starting and I haven't got a barrister. And they would say, okay, no problem. Or parts would say, no problem, we'll get somebody else in. So I would then, between myself and your original barrister, instruct that new barrister, bring them up to speed, make sure they're ready for your case, which they would be. And that's how the criminal justice system was able to just continue and things, work seamlessly. But because of the issue with no pay and low pay, it's now meant that barristers are now saying, so Barrister B is now saying, no, I'm really sorry. I was not the original barrister who was instructed to do this case, therefore I'm not going to do the case. So that's what it calls, that's what they call no returns. And that's something that might still be happening, but it's a real concern. But that's where kind of, I guess, the criminal justice system is at the moment.
Wow. I didn't know about the no returns situation, because obviously you're not a normal solicitor, like you're just an advocate, so you have the ability to be in the higher courts. Do you still find yourself instructing barristers a lot, or do you kind of only instruct them when it's really necessary and you're on something that you can't kind of split your time?
So I instruct barristers a lot. So my practice, my actual practice is based on myself doing all of the prep work, doing the solicitor work, and then I just brief counsel out. And that's just something that I do. Other solicitors work the same, others will do their own cases, but I tend to want to do that more because it gives me greater flexibility. It also means that I am more available for my clients. I can offer a more bespoke service if I don't have to go to court all the time, because I'm, in essence, there and available. But you can still, so there are some cases that I might decide, actually, I might want to do the advocacy on this. And I'm okay to do that. So it just gives me that greater flexibility. I'm able to pick and choose what I want to do and when. So yeah, it works for me.
It definitely sounds like it works. Options is always a good thing. So the fact that you can, run all the way through with it, or stop at a certain point and give it to someone who you feel like can take it over, I think that's really good. Typically, I feel like, especially because barristers are independent, they don't generally go directly to clients for their work unless they have direct access. Do you find that solicitors will act with certain chambers, or do you feel like they kind of will give work to whatever barristers are available from whatever chambers?
Yeah, so it depends on the firm, really. I mean, I'm slightly different because I'm what you call consultant, so I work for myself, but I work through a law firm. So I get to choose who I instruct, when, how, why, and so forth. But firms might have their barristers, their own chambers that they tend to work with most of the time. Or they might have a situation where, for example, the partners get on well with certain chambers and they've got like history between the chambers and the law firm. So you find that if you are a junior solicitor, you will tend to brief the chambers that you are told to brief by the heads, the
partners,
So so I can brief whoever I want, and I enjoy meeting new people and obviously new talent, because not one barrister can do every single case. Not one barrister can get on with every single client. And that's the role of a solicitor. It's to make sure that you're matching up the right barrister with the right client. And the right case. It's not, I wouldn't brief just one barrister for every single job, for every case, because it just wouldn't work.
People have expertise, right?
Absolutely. And also in our personalities, we're unique. Sometimes you have barristers who are very flamboyant, very fun, very and you might have a client who's very withdrawn,
Yeah,
and perhaps
don't want to
feel
talk too much.
comfortable
Yeah,
with that kind
yeah.
of barrister. So it's a real skill as a solicitor, because it's one of the things that you have to do in your daily job, which is to match the right client with the right barrister. Because ultimately, if it goes wrong, your your client is turning around and saying,
"What did you do?" And obviously, the elephant in the room, the thing we haven't quite spoken about, is the fact that I came across you when you starred in the BBC documentary for one of your clients. What was that like? And obviously, I know you deal with a lot of campaign work. Was that part of the type of work that you do? Or talk to us. It was very interesting seeing you.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, it was very unexpected how it all came about in any event, because I had just started representing him. He had this strange order, which I'd heard of it, but I'd never heard it used in the way it was being used, which is a criminal behaviour order, in short CBO. And for those who've watched the documentary, they know what basically it was about, where it sort of stated what he could and couldn't rap about,
Right.
who he could and couldn't be with, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt, when I saw the order, met him, and I thought, he's quite funny. He was such a funny little
character, yes.
Such a character, but very humble. Just a really, really nice guy. And what came through for me was the fact that he was just a kid who just wanted to make it.
Yeah.
And I'm a sucker for people like that. I'm a sucker for people
who are just grinding,
the
like
whole world against them.
Yeah.
But they're trying to make it work. They're trying to kind of make something of themselves. And that's why I just fell in hook, line and sinker. And I remember sort of reading stuff about him online, and there were lots of comments of people saying, "Oh, it's back in prison again. He loves it in there. He's always in there," which was a bit mean. And I thought, oh, that's a bit horrible. But I didn't know who he was at the time, so I was like, okay, fine. So having kind of read those comments, then met him, then realised this order that he had, and I thought, wow, nobody ever talks about this. People don't actually know about these things called CBOs and what they mean, and kind of what happens in the background and what courts and the state can do. So I thought, actually, let's make a documentary about this. Let's tell the world.
Nice.
And also, explain to people that, you don't like prison.
Yeah, literally. And if you do X, Y, Z, this could be the same predicament you find yourself in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I just wanted people to see that he was very misunderstood, and also that actually there are bigger powers at being in the background that are doing things that are making things difficult.
Yeah.
But I wanted people to see his journey and to see what I was seeing, which is somebody who was determined to win and to make it. And so I said to him, let's do a documentary. And he was like, okay, cool. So then I spoke to a production company, spoke to his management company. That was sort of campaigning, but in a different way.
Yeah.
It's a more of a subtle way. When people say campaigning, I guess people always have in their heads, it's like you got
picketing. Yeah.
Picketing. Yeah, there's that, but there's other ways to campaign. There's always things that you can do and say to speak for others.
Yeah.
And that's all I ever try to do all the time. So and a lot of the way I try to do it is through education. So educating people is a way of campaigning against something and showing another side to things. So in the documentary, all we did was to give the audience the facts of what was happening and give them all the characters and let the audience decide what they thought about the situation. So you never hear me saying, this is happening because of this, or this is no, it's just, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
This is the law. This is him. This is his story.
See for yourself. Yeah, literally.
Absolutely. And as a lawyer, that's what you're doing. You're just presented with facts on a daily basis, and then you have to obviously analyze the facts and then decide how to use
The best way to present it, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. So part of a lot of work that I do now is about sort of, I wouldn't say I'm campaigning for drills, but I am campaigning for the right of young people to be able to express themselves in a way in which they can, and in a way in which, you know, enables them to change their lives around, to make money legitimately. So that is something that I'm passionate about. The other thing I do in terms of campaigning is I'm one of the trustees for a great charity called the Stop and Search Legal Project. So we go into schools, wherever we can find young people, basically, who will give us like an hour or something. We go in and we educate them through an interactive play where we've devised characters and so forth. And it starts off with, so the play is to do with stop and search. And again, we are giving the young people facts and equipping them with ways upon which to be able to deal with situations such as stop and search. So when they're confronted by an officer who says, empty your bag right now and jump up and down and, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
They know how to deal with without getting themselves into a situation where they're being deemed to be aggressive, or ending up being arrested. So what we found was, in relation to stop and search, again, it's a very good tool, a very powerful tool, if used appropriately.
Of course. And that's the thing. I feel like no one disputes the need for stop and search. No one wants weapons on the street. No one wants anyone to get hurt. However, the problem only arises when there's an abuse of power. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's where the problem is, 100%. We go into schools and we teach young people about sort of dealing with stop and search. And then also we get their views in terms of what they think about stop and search and whether it's something that should remain. And a lot of the young people actually say, yes, we think stop and search is a very good tool, but only if there are checks and balances for the police about how to stop and search and when. Absolutely.
And some of these are school children, which is amazing that they're able to actually take in that information, analyze it critically, and then present it, because the last part of the sort of interactive plays, they then present, they've got for and against, and then they have to have arguments for stop and search and against stop and search, and they present it in a courtroom to a judge who's another member of, you know, the group.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to watch, you know, so they're learning about obviously what happens in a courtroom, but also they're doing advocacy without really realizing it.
Yeah.
And they are presenting an argument forcefully, but also eloquently. So it's just such a wonderful way to teach young people. And that is campaigning, but campaigning in a different way, which is more interactive and more educational.
Absolutely. No, I think that's so true. Campaigning is very, when people think of it, it's all, you know, marching up and down the street, and it's not. It really is any way in which to communicate information to people that will benefit them. So well done for being a part of the project and pushing forward that documentary. I had no idea. I had no idea that you were the spearhead. We needed it and we enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I think that is all the questions that I had and that we discussed. Obviously, you're a busy woman. I don't know if you have time to go through a couple of questions, or we should
should we do 5 questions?
Okay, 5 is good. Do you have a good work-life balance? That's a really good question, because the corporate law doesn't have a good reputation for that. What's the criminal law like?
Criminal law is difficult because, remember, with criminal law, you don't know when somebody's going to be arrested. So they can be arrested at 2 o'clock in the morning, or they can be arrested, you know, a nice time, 9:30 in the morning, which is really unusual. I think a lot of the time, if the police are going to pick someone up, they want to pick them up when it's convenient to them, but not to that person or you. So that's just rule of thumb. That's what I found. So it can be really, really difficult. And there's times when I really do have to try and be very, very strict with myself to try and close off at certain times. Otherwise, I find myself working throughout. So I now try to make sure that I'm working sort of between 9:30, 5:30 or 6. But it still
has those unpredictable peaks.
Yeah, and I think criminal law is really difficult for that, and the reason for it is police stations. You just never know when someone's going to be arrested.
Right, and you did your police station accreditation whilst you were working. So I don't know if you know, generally, is that something you have to pay for? And do you know how long that type of accreditation takes? Just for anyone who's wondering.
So you do, yeah, so absolutely. I mean, it's a very good question. So you do have to pay for it. At the time I did mine, I'm not going to say because then I'll sound old, but it would have probably been about 15 years ago. Over 15 years. So at that stage, it was about, I think, 1,000 to 1,500. So there's so much to, kind of obtaining this qualification. First of all, it's the payment. So if you can find a firm that you can attach to or you work for as a paralegal who are willing to put you through the police station accreditation.
Right.
Because the other thing that you need is you need to have a supervisor. And the supervisor has to be a criminal lawyer and somebody that obviously does criminal law, because you also have to present a portfolio. So you've got to be able to do, I think it's 12 cases in total, which you write up and you submit. And obviously your supervisor has to go through them. So I think the first 3, you have your supervisor with you. Then after that, you're doing it on your own. But I haven't done it in such a long time, so it's really difficult to kind of remember. But that's one of the things. And that's really important, to make sure that you've got somebody who can assist you with that and put you through it. But yeah, so that's what I did. I worked whilst doing my accreditation.
Wow, good to know. Okay. In terms of becoming a solicitor advocate, is there any preliminary requirements? So, for example, you have to be a solicitor for a certain amount of years, or could you literally qualify as a solicitor and get the qualification to become a solicitor advocate straight away?
Before, they used to kind of want you to have been practicing as a solicitor for some time, just so that you had an understanding in relation to court procedure, preparation for court and advocacy.
Right, exactly.
But there is no requirement as in that you have to have done this many years. So my route was, I qualified as, I got my police station accreditation, so I was able to go to police stations and represent, people in police stations. Then I qualified as a solicitor. Then I qualified as a duty solicitor.
Okay.
And then I undertook my solicitor, my higher rights qualification.
Okay.
So I did quite a few steps before becoming a solicitor advocate.
Okay.
But there may be courses that enable you sometimes to actually, as part of your, do modules on a
to add it on, right?
That assist with the higher rights course. Because things are always changing.
Definitely.
In our area of law, and even the way you undertake your training now is changing. So yeah, but there's no specific requirement, but you do need to be a solicitor first. Okay. That's the only requirement.
What's the difference between a duty solicitor and a solicitor? Just because I have no idea.
So in a criminal firm, you would have a duty solicitor, and you'd also have you'd have a solicitor, and they're either a duty solicitor or they're not. Okay. So, in England and Wales, if you are arrested, one of your rights is to be represented by a solicitor. Okay. That's one of your rights that our government has made sure is enshrined, and you have. Now, in order to be represented, usually you'd say, well, I don't have money to be represented, but the government has made sure that whilst you're at the police station, you're entitled to free, independent legal advice. Now, where does that free, independent legal advice come from?
Right.
The government. So, in essence, as a duty solicitor, what you would be doing is undertaking another course in order to be able, as a firm, to undertake duties to represent people who have been arrested and need that assistance in the police station. And the way it works is every firm then goes on a rota system, and when it's that firm's turn to go on the rota system, that firm will be called, and then you get a lovely solicitor that comes to the police station to represent you free of charge. That's a duty solicitor. And equally so, when you're a duty solicitor with that course, it enables you as well for you to be represented by a duty solicitor if you appear at the magistrate's court for a first appearance. If what you are facing is a case upon which you are at risk of having custody, then you can have a duty solicitor. So the government has tried to look after us, folks.
Okay. And obviously, if you can't, it makes perfect sense. And obviously, if you tell them that you can't afford to pay for your own solicitor, then that's when the duty solicitor kind of steps in to be like, okay.
Steps in.
Yeah.
Or, and then in other instances, so for me, most of my clients are own clients. So they wouldn't go through the duty scheme.
Okay.
If they get arrested, all they would say is, I want Cecilia Goodwin. I'm on the database as a solicitor. The police would find me. And that's when I'd get woken up to say, this person has requested your assistance.
Yes, they want you to come at 2 a.m. It's only you they want. It's like the joys and the punishment. It's like, I'm glad that it's me that you want, but it's like, oh, okay, it's all right. Mid-dream, we'll get up. It's all right. It's all good.
A bit early.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. A question that's come in, and definitely something that was on the list that we didn't cover, is what advice would you give to aspiring lawyers about either entering the profession or going into criminal law specifically?
Okay, so first of all, I would say if it's something that you really want to do, if you really want to become a lawyer, then go for it. What's the worst that can happen? That it doesn't happen.
Right.
But at least you tried. But one thing I would say is try and get experience. So if you were present when we started the conversation, you remember I said I worked 3 jobs, and you notice that I could have worked in a shop. I could have, a shop would have been lovely. I love clothes. I could have worked somewhere which would have been more fun. But that wouldn't have given me much experience in relation to what I wanted to do. And that's why 2 of the jobs that I did were in law, because that enabled me to kind of have an understanding as to whether I really wanted to do this. Because first of all, the degree is not cheap. Law school is not cheap. And when you start out, depending on the area that you're going into, it's a lot of money in terms of getting yourself sorted and being able to, kind of before you even get to a position where people are paying you money for your knowledge.
Services,
so I would say make sure it's something you really, really want to do, and try to get work experience if you can. In relation to criminal law, obviously there was an announcement today saying that more money is going to be injected into the system. I don't know when that will be and how quickly it will roll out and what it will mean for firms being able to hire people, because at the moment I know a lot of firms are struggling.
Yeah, they need people, but it's like, can I afford to take more people on? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I would say if you're in a situation where you can, perhaps supplement some of the income that you'll be getting, then by all means give it a go. But it's very difficult to say definitely go into criminal practice or to say don't. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of in between, but it's because had this announcement not been made today, I would probably be sat here saying, I don't think it's a very good idea. But because there's some money supposedly coming in, then there's hope. So
amazing.
But maybe have a plan B.
Any tips for getting a good training contract and qualifying? So
whatever area of law you want to get into, research the firms and work out whether it's a good firm, and whether they're likely to pay you well. But also try and see if you can get any information online about people who've worked there, or any kind of information. So for example, joining organizations like Urban Lawyers and things like that, they're fantastic because you get to meet people who are actually working, who are practicing law. and they have lots of seminars where you can talk to other people, because the best thing about life is we all have mouths, and you can ask people about things and their experiences. So that's always a good thing. Do your research, because firms will do their research on you if you're going to be joining their firm or applying. So you should also do research about the firms. In relation to making sure you get that contract, firms like people who look serious about the area of law that they're applying to go into. So if somebody comes to me and says, I want to do some training with you or your firm or work with you, I want to see on their CV that they've actually undertaken some sort of criminal work at all, or done things that it could even be volunteering, you know, in a shelter or whatever it is that could show that actually you are keen on this area of law. You know, that's important. I mean, there was when I was kind of coming up, I was looking at all kinds of things. I was thinking about everything, and one of the things I nearly became was an appropriate adult. So there's a thing called an appropriate adult scheme, and an appropriate adult scheme is where somebody who is deemed an appropriate person, so they have to be over 18 and not be involved in the offence that the suspect has been interviewed for. And they give their time to go to the police station, and their role is to facilitate and assist with communication between the suspect and their lawyer and the suspect and the police. So, for example, if it's a young person and they're under 18, of course, they're going to need an appropriate adult because they can't be interviewed without one. They should have an appropriate adult. So I was actually thinking, well, I don't know how else to get into this area of law, but I can see that, you know, an appropriate adult is in the police stations, and why don't I give it a go? So things like that. Think outside of the box. You know, that's not working for the police, that's not working for a law firm, but it's still within criminal law. And I would still be kind of just absorbing everything that's happening. So if I was to go to an interview in a criminal firm, I would know what PACE means, I would know what a caution is, I would know what an interview is and what happens in an interview. Things like that make you stand out from the rest. So think outside of the box.
Excellent answer. And I think that's a great way to end our final question. And that is, how do you remember the important laws and any tips for practice? So how is it that you remember what this is and what rules apply and all of that? Because I feel like there must be a lot.
There are a lot. But what happens is, in practice, there are certain offences that you tend to come across quite often. So then you just kind of know exactly what it is. It just reels from, you know, it's weird. I've never forgotten this act, and amongst others, but the act is the Offences Against the Persons Act. For some reason, during university, it just stuck in my mind. So I would never forget that. And I know that under that act, there's various different offences that come under it. And so you tend to remember the same sorts of areas of law that you deal with all the time. But the wonderful thing about life now, and one of the things that's very, very important for lawyers, is you are not supposed to remember everything in your head, because we're human beings, you know. Yes, there's certain things you'll remember, but the wonderful thing about being a lawyer is knowing where to find it.
Exactly.
So you've got the books, research it. Nobody is ever going to criticize you because you didn't remember Section 2 of the Criminal Damage Act. No one's going to, you know, or whatever it is. The fact is, as long as you know where to find it, or you can say to someone, I'm not sure about that. Let me get back to you. It's better to do that than to say something
and give the wrong advice. Oh,
then you look like a clown.
Perfect. And you have answered all of the questions that you needed to. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for your time. Honestly, it's been great.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everybody that joined. And thank you for your comments and your questions. And yeah, so Have a lovely evening.
Literally done my roundup for me. No, honestly. No, it's all good. It's all good. No, honestly, thank you everyone who's still in the live. Like, you lot have really soldiered with us over the last hour plus. So we really appreciate it. All of your comments, I feel like I'm repeating you. All of your messages. We appreciate it.
And
thank you, and have a good night, guys.
This, Nadine.
You're welcome, Daniel. We'll speak soon. Bye.
Okay, bye. Bye-bye.